Today's lesson is lesson 18, one of my favorites, the Lewis and Clark expedition. How do you feel about a grand adventure? Do you love to set off on a journey and not knowing what awaits you around the next corner? Would you have joined a daring 1804 expedition across North America dispatched by President Jefferson? Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led a group of men, along with one woman, an infant, and a dog, into unknown terrain. Unfettered from the fear of wild animals, extreme weather, and potential hostile inhabitants, they embarked on a 2-year mission to discover exactly what the land possessed. While their goals were many, they can be summed up in one of the instructions given to them by Jefferson before their departure. The object of your mission is to explore. Increasingly, Thomas Jefferson requested funding for an expedition across North America in January of 1803, before the United States bought the Louisiana Purchase. He had long desired to add to the piece of land to the country. By the time the Congress approved the exploration, and it was underway in May of 1804, the land had officially become the territory of the United States. The goal of the expedition was primarily to seek the Northwest Passage, an elusive westward path across North America to the Pacific Ocean by water. This was seen as very important because a water route would connect the United States with the Oregon country in the west and bring the nation one step closer to control across the entire continent. The expedition also aimed to study the flora and the fauna of the Northwest, as well as its climate, geology, and geography. This information would be used to create accurate maps of the territory. Remember that upon the Louisiana Purchase, no one knew for sure where the borders lay. Lewis and Clark also hoped to identify the presence of natural resources and establish relationship with the indigenous people or Indians anywhere already in the vast wilderness. While they were forced to cross the Bitterroot Mountains in present-day Montana on land, they did travel 5,000 miles out of 8,000 miles of their trip by river using their keelboat and other small boats. The Northwest Passage eluded them, although the group was successful on many other fronts. Several members of the group kept detailed journals of their discoveries. They also collected specimens wherever possible. Over 140 maps of the territory were drawn, including extensive documentation of the rivers in the Northwest. They connected with the indigenous peoples and found that most groups welcomed the explorers, with a few exceptions. For an activity break, one of the goals of the expedition was to discover and record the wildlife of Western North America. Can you imagine what fun it must have been to document and name animals that most of the world had never seen before? Look up pictures of some of the animals they found, and then pick one or two to sketch. You can look for a directed drawing or just find a picture to copy. A list of the animals they discovered can be viewed on the resource page. The Corps of Discovery, or the members of the expedition were called, was an elite group. They were carefully selected because of the specific skills and talents that would be useful on their grand adventure, such as hunting, boating, and carpentry. The group was originally made up of 48 men, but after they spent the first winter at Fort Mandan, present-day North Dakota, a contingent of the men returned to the capital to report to Jefferson of their findings thus far. The permanent party of 33 continued on. Let's learn more about some of the well-known members of the Corps. Meriwether Lewis was the undisputed leader of the expedition. Appointed by Jefferson himself, increasingly Lewis requested that Clark be made a co-leader, but he refused. At any rate, they acted as equal throughout the journey and even referred to one another as captain, in spite of the fact that Clark was a lieutenant. Lewis had spent time in the Virginia militia after college and later became a captain in the U.S. Army. He got to know Jefferson well while serving as secretary in the White House, and he was a personal friend as well. After being chosen to head the exploration, he was trained in useful areas such as botany, zoology, navigation by the use of the stars, and medicine. He was an intelligent, capable frontiersman who was well suited to the job he was given. William Clark. William Clark had been in the Kentucky militia before, serving in the United States Army with Lewis. His skills were quite diverse. He was a cartographer or a map maker, as well as the waterman, a boat operator, and he also had a talent for communication. Many times he's used the gift to establish peaceful relationships with the Indians they encountered. Clark's journey of the trip was the most complete. It tells the tales of courageous adventurer and loyal traveler partner. William Clark even began the legal guardian of the son of their interpreter and guide, Sacagawea. After the expedition, he stayed with Clark and received an education. Later, after Sacagawea died in 1812, Clark took in her daughter as well. Sacagawea was the Shoshone American Indian people group who were kidnapped as a child and sold to her husband, Toussaint Charbonnet. At a young age, the pair became interpreters and guides for Lewis and Clark during the first winter of the journey. While her husband was not well liked, she proved invaluable to the group. In the culture of the indigenous people, women didn't go to war, and she was allowed to accompany the Corps, even though it was unconventional, to serve as a symbol of peace. When they met up with her brother, a Shoshone chief, shortly before they went overland across the Bitterroot Mountains, she helped negotiate the purchase of necessary horses for the Corps. She also had valuable skills in foraging edible plants, and she crafted moccasin and clothing for the group. She gave birth to a son, Jean Baptiste, only at about 2 months before setting off to the Pacific. She carried Pomp, as he was nicknamed, on her back on a cradle board across the continent, over 500,000 miles. 5,000 miles. Indigenous people. Sacagawea was the most well-known of the indigenous peoples encountered by Lewis and Clark expedition, but she was far from the only one. They interacted with at least 48 distinct tribes, many of whom helped them find food, survive freezing temperatures, and directed them to safe passage. While Lewis and Clark's interaction with indigenous people were mostly peaceful, the aftermath of their expedition had a disastrous effect on the indigenous culture. The increase of settlers brought disease, conflicts over land, and ultimate relocation of many Indian groups. When reflecting on the Corps of Discovery, it is important to consider that there is another side to the story, maybe something you want to learn more about with your family. Did you know a black Newfoundland dog named Seaman was one of the members of the Corps Discovery? He was purchased before the journey by Lewis for $20. According to the journey entries, he had adventures of his own, including getting lost for a time, catching and killing an antelope, swimming in the river, serving as a watchdog for the group, getting cactus spines in his paw, and being wounded by an angry beaver. The Lewis and Clark expedition by the numbers. Keelboat, 55 feet long and able to carry up to 30 tons. 2 canoes, 6 flat-bottomed rowboats, $38,000 total cost of the journey. 8,000 miles traveled, St. Louis, Missouri to the Pacific Ocean and back. 1 year, 6 months, and 1 day of travel just to reach the Pacific Ocean. 28 months of transcontinental travel for the entire round trip. Transcontinental travel. 122 new animals and birds discovered. 178 new plants discovered. 1,600 acres of land, each awarded to Lewis and Clark as the conclusion of their expedition. Lewis and Clark's journey has been referred as the American's greatest adventure story, and as you can see, it's a fitting name. When they returned from the exploration, both men were treated as heroes. While the Northwest Passage eluded them, their work was integral to American expansion. The tales they brought home stirred the frontier spirit of countless Americans, and westward settlement was fueled by their adventures. They had reached the mighty Pacific Ocean and lived to tell the story. While not the first to see these lands, the records were not by far the most complete. To the young country, the expedition represented the independence and pioneering soul of the American people. They were charged by Jefferson to explore, and explore they did, through the rivers, forests, mountains, ecosystems, and indigenous communities of the American West. And that concludes our lesson 18 for today.